Peter, thank you very much for joining me here today. I'm excited to have you. You have a hell of a story on your hands, but I wanted to go all the way back to the beginning first. You started off being sponsored by a racquetball company called Eklaton. That was your first step into the business world and how sponsorships were made. What did that teach you about branding and representing a business in general?
Look, for me, I grew up in a small town, and um, playing racquetball I didn't think that racquetball was going to be my vehicle to allow me to travel around the country. And it became so I love sports. I loved athletics. I loved being active. That's what got me into the sport. And by becoming a sponsored player for Ectalon and then traveling and representing that brand, it was myself and my twin brother representing the brand. That's just the fruits of hard work. So when I started playing the game, I didn't know that I was going to take it to the level that I did, but it certainly worked out, right? I was able to travel around the country, which was very rewarding for a young guy that had never traveled before. So that was one great point. And then the other side of it was it ended up opening a career path for me within this fitness space that I took to a whole nother level as well.
Yeah, because that's what led you into getting your first opportunity to run an actual health club. Were there already things that you
Yeah.
saw when you were still like in your teenage years where you were like, this the club could really be doing this a lot better, even back then, before you even had the business to run?
Look, my father ran a small grocery store in my hometown, and being an entrepreneur was something I always wanted to do. I always wanted to own my own business because I witnessed my dad do it. Every day I got to watch my dad get up, go to work, lead people, have vision, work hard. And when you do all the right things at the right times, sometimes you prosper and become successful. And my dad did that in his own right, in his own little grocery store in this hometown. But having a front row seat to watching someone get up early, work all day, come home late, and do that day in, day out. And then eventually, when you wake up one day and you've got this thriving business, I had a front row seat to watching that. So for me, I always aspired to be an entrepreneur, but not just an entrepreneur. I wanted to be a successful entrepreneur. And there's a big difference.
Hmm. What is the difference between a failing entrepreneur and a successful entrepreneur?
I can tell you straight up, being a successful entrepreneur is a hell of a lot more fun. But I've been on both sides of it as an entrepreneur. I've been on sides. Look, being in business in general is a lot of work. I come into a lot of people, they say, I'm an entrepreneur. And I tell them, hey, look, being an entrepreneur is easy, but being a successful entrepreneur takes work. It takes work, it takes commitment, dedication, courage, perseverance, grit. Those are all great words that some of the most successful entrepreneurs I've met in my career have all encompassed. It's not for everyone. And being on the receiving end of having a failing business, that's no fun. And I learned from people that look, many of my life lessons have come in times of hardship and and difficult times, because when you're in difficult times, you've got to lean in. You've got to look at what you're doing. You've got to evaluate. You got to evaluate yourself, evaluate the product. Do you need to pivot? These are all things. And in business, I can't think of any business where you're not constantly evolving. Business is you've always got to be mindful of what is the competition doing? What is the consumer expecting? Is my product still relevant? And you have to always lean into that relevance through the eyes of the consumer, because that's what drives your business. If your product's no longer relevant, you don't have the customer base supporting your business and you're dead. It's really that simple. So, being an entrepreneur, as I said earlier, look, it's work. But with that said, there's not a more enjoyable journey and position to be in than owning a thriving, successful business where you have the opportunity to serve people, to provide employees with a level of comfort in their life where they get a chance to be part of a bigger vision and a big team. Those are all wonderful qualities that come with being a successful entrepreneur.
You got your first shot at the very record club that you used to play for. That's where you started. That's where you got to run the business for the first time. You were 22 at that point. What was your mindset going into that? Because you were the one who offered the leadership to take that role. But when you actually started, was it like, holy shit, what am I going to do now? Or
Yeah,
did you fall right into it?
it's exactly what it was. Hey, look, you know what? When you're in leadership roles, especially early on, never let people see you sweat. And for me, of course, I was nervous. I was 22 years old. I had never led people before, and I'd never ran a business before. So there was some apprehensiveness there, but I never showed it because that's a sign of weakness. And I think by being an athlete and being competitive, you stare down hardship, you stare down competition, you just do what you got to do to persevere. I was nervous, but I also knew this: I was running a health club. And early on, by watching my father, I realized that the heartbeat of the business came from the people. It came from the members. So focus on the members first. Make sure that the member, the guest experience is where it needs to be. So I understood customer service and I understood the product itself. And that's why early on, one of the first things we did is we gave the club a deep cleaning. And then as people saw that happening, they saw that we were suddenly taking better care of the club. We were painting walls. We were just always leaning in, trying to make it a better environment for all of our members. And as the members witnessed that firsthand and they saw me leading the charge in that endeavor, they very quickly rallied around me because they wanted to see me succeed because I was working so unbelievably hard. And if anyone on my team was not leaning in, if they were not willing to put the effort, the same level of effort that I was putting in, and they were not willing to learn and allow me to mentor them, I replaced them. I got rid of them because the 10, 15 years prior to me getting there, the business was failing and it was failing with the staff that was in there. So I didn't go in there and start firing everyone, but I did let everyone know that, look, we are going to raise the bar of service and quality of the product that we're delivering. And I hope that everyone wants to get on the bus. But they knew very quickly that I was not playing games. I was not going to, if you weren't willing to lean in and put forth effort, I was going to replace you.
Did you put a lot of the capabilities that the people did have into their hands? Because you're not a micromanager now. Have you always had that leadership style? Do you always let people do what they're good at, or was that something that came over time?
I've always started by leading by example. That's first and foremost. Look, and I don't put myself above any position. And I learned that from my father. If you want people to walk on fire for you, they got to know that you believe in them, number one, that you will walk on fire for them, that you trust them with the job at hand. And when people can feel that from you, then you get a sense of loyalty from them. You get a sense of loyalty, a sense of commitment. And that's just all part of leading people. And together, you lock arms and you're all moving towards a common goal. So that's my leadership style. And I expect a lot of the people, especially my key people that are around me, the people that are in higher C-level employees or even department heads. Look, I've got higher expectations of them. Why? Because I put them in that position. If I didn't think they could do it, I wouldn't put them in the position. So there's a level of confidence that I have in people when I put them in a role that I think they can succeed at. And sometimes there's some tough love there where you got to pull people aside and say, hey, look, you know what? You're better than this. You're not giving me 100%. You're giving me 75%, and that's not going to work. Now, look, what's going on? Is there something going on in your personal life that I can help you with? But I tell you what, you got to get in the game because I'm not going to let the company suffer. I'm not going to let the other employees suffer by your lack of drive and commitment to the responsibility that comes with your role. Period. And they look. I bet in my career, I've been in business for 40 years, and in my career, I've had those tough conversations dozens of times, and there hasn't. I can't think of a time where I haven't had those conversations with an employee and they haven't came back later and said, man, thank you for holding me accountable to a standard that you saw in me and I didn't see in myself. And that's mentoring. Period. That's straight up mentoring. And sometimes I don't think there's enough of that. I think sometimes there's a lot of leadership out there where they find people so disposable, and that's unfortunate.
You started opening new
Yeah.
locations, and now you have a lot more to manage than you can with just one racket club. How did you approach management at that point? What did you look for in the people to do more of the senior level tasks?
The good news is I was only selling health club memberships, so running a health club is fairly simple. Honestly, you've got to have the right floor plan, you've got to have the right equipment, and if you have the right floor plan and the right equipment and you can create the right atmosphere, the consumer will come. All right. So you have to understand what it is your product is, and more importantly, what the consumer is looking for. And I've always been very fortunate to be able to connect those dots. But then at the end of the day, you walk into a club, I don't care what business you're walking into, and I do that myself today. When I'm walking into a business, if I'm consulting for someone, before I ever meet the team, and especially if it's a consumer facing business, I walk into it because I want to feel what is the energy of this business? What's the color palette look like? How is it laid out? Is it messy? Is it clean? Does it look like a tight operation? That's the first thing that I look at because that's my first impression. And then, secondly, I learn about what is the product and how are they introducing the product to the consumer. What is it you're trying to sell, and what is your brand message to me as the consumer? The third thing I look at is how is the message delivered? In other words, how sharp is your human capital? And I can tell you straight up, there's a lot of times where people have a great product, they got a great atmosphere, a great product, and they suffer on the sales side of it because the passion of the human capital, the passion of the team is weak. And it's hard to teach passion. And sometimes that passion comes from the top. And there's times I got to tell people, hey, look, I think you're going to be better served in this business bringing on somebody else to run the company because this is not your core competency. Don't take that the wrong way. Hey, look, I've worked with dozens of people in my business career that have got great vision. They know how to create a great atmosphere, great vision. They can create a great product, but they're horseshit at running the business and motivating their staff to deliver a great product. It's not that horseshit is a little bit strong, but they're not great. And to me, if you're going to go through the effort of opening a business, make sure you're great. Make sure that you're giving it everything that it needs to succeed. You don't ever want to get into a business, the business is failing, somebody else steps in, same product, same location, same everything, and they drive it through the moon. Okay. How are they able to turn that business around and drive it? Passion, people, they're inspiring. And that's exactly what I did in that very first health club. It was the same location. It was the equipment was old, the club was dirty, nobody cared. And suddenly when I came in and put effort into cleaning it, why? Because I knew that I could give the customer a great, friendly, appreciative experience, but that'll only get you so far. If the club is dirty, you can be as polite and cordial as can be, but if the club is dirty and if your equipment is constantly breaking down, eventually they're just going to move on because they have a higher expectation. But in my case, I cleaned it up, added equipment as I could, as cash flow allowed me to. I bartered, I traded. I got very creative on how I could bring the business together. And I was successful at doing that. And I learned a lot through that experience.
It's interesting what you say about sales, also about leadership and the way that you portray yourself, because I come from a sales background, usually, and it was more B2B focused, but I think this is pretty similar in B2C, where you come into a company and you think you're doing a pretty good job of doing sales, but then you come in and they say, here's your script. Stick to the script. Don't veer off the script. Do you think that character is very important for the sales cycle? Does sales mainly encompass your personality, or does it also have something to do with the value proposition of the company?
I think number one, you have to have a good value proposition. The product that you're selling, whether it's goods or service or a little of both, it's got to be relevant in the eyes of the consumer. If you're trying to sell something that the audience doesn't want, you're dead. Okay. So that part of it. And having a script as a guideline, as a template, look, I'm all for that. I'm all for it. But I'm not to the extent where you're a robot. Okay. I think some of the best salespeople that I've experienced, not only who have worked for me, but have sold me things, have been able to go off script and connect with me as a person, find out where my interests lie. They do a little homework with me, so they're informed when they're calling me. They're not. It's not cold. So when I see people that that put forth that effort, that they've actually done some homework, just out of, I'm going to give them more of my time because they showed me some effort. They did a little homework.
Mhm.
And then that's important. Not all the time, but most of the time, I'll give them consideration for the effort they put forth.
I think about 18 years after you ran the first health club, you sell your company, you have 3.5 million in the bank. And basically, at that point, you've accomplished what you wanted to accomplish, or what most Americans would want to accomplish, or anyone to be successful and to live a comfortable life. And then your friend comes to you and he says, "I want you to start another one and better." And you say no multiple times, and then you still do it. Why did you decide to take the
Yeah.
risk?
You know what? I felt indebted to him. I felt indebted to him. He was a friend of mine. He had worked with me for about 12 years, great guy. And me saying no to it was just, I didn't want to get back into the grind, but I would say divine intervention. Call it what you want. Look, there's a lot of things that have happened in my life, Colin, that are unexplainable. Being at the right place at the right time. Look, yeah, there's some of that, but I think there's bigger forces behind some things that happen to people. I just happen to believe that. I'm a Christian, and I just happen to believe that. I believe that coming from the youngest of seven kids, growing up very modest lifestyle, going to school in a two-room schoolhouse, I did not have a lot of opportunity. But the one opportunity that was put forward to me, I had, thank God, I had parents that showed me how to work. Okay, so if you're willing to put in the work, that's the first step of success. And so I'm thankful for that. And then having the right opportunities at the right time to try to turn around that failing health club and then being successful at it, which segued into obviously opening up some smaller gyms. That when I started it, I know that I was going to go on and build one of the largest wellness brands in the world. I didn't know that, but as I sit back and look at it, it was the training grounds. That whole timeline up to starting Snap Fitness, as I sit back and reflect on it, it was purely the training ground, the fundamentals, the day to day block and tackling, and the discipline of being organized so you could deliver and execute on a vision. And I was very successful at doing that. I'm not a one man wrecking crew. Yes, I have vision, and I'm able to put systems and processes together, but without an assembly of very competent, qualified people around me, you're you're very limited as to how far you're going to go.
Mhm.
And I've had the good fortune of standing on the shoulders of some amazing people in my 40-year business career.
That's also another thing, you're doing it with other people. People are reliant on you. If we look at Snap Fitness, it seemed like everything was pretty smooth sailing, which it never is, obviously. You had an enormous turnaround in 90 days to have enough cash flow, which would set the business ready for the next year, and quite quickly started expanding and testing in different locations. But what were some of the really hard times at Snap Fitness? Some of the moments where everything really seemed to go tits up, and you were like, "Okay, this is where I can
Well,
show what I'm worth."
you know what's hard, Colin, whether it's Snap Fitness or any of the franchise concepts that I've started. Look, you when you're franchising, you create a model and you roll the model out, and the you hope that the dogs eat the dog food. The business has to perform, okay? And in Snap Fitness, in all of my brands, the the reception from the general public was huge. Okay, people loved the product. All right, but As you broaden the brand and going into different locations, there's different dynamics that come into play. There's different layers, levels of competition. And some people run their business. Let's face it, a franchise, what you're doing is you're teaching them the secret sauce of how to run the business. But as we said earlier in this interview, thriving, the heartbeat of the business is the people. So you can have a great product in a great location, but if you don't have the people to run it, if you don't have the people with the passion that are going to make the customer feel special and loved and show empathy and all these things, then your business could be at risk. And what's always been challenging in franchising is when you get a franchisee, they come in, they go through their due diligence process. You tell them, hey, look, here's what the stores are doing. Franchisees have the ability to talk to those owners and ask them, how's your store performing? We can't talk about that as a franchisor. We can only talk about businesses that have been open, stores that have been open for a year or more. But we tell any franchise candidates, go ahead and talk to the other franchisees. They can tell you anything you want. Ask them any questions. If they're willing to give you the time, ask them. Well, so they get in their mind that they're going to open the store and their store is going to do as good as that store or the one that whatever. And then when they open the store and it doesn't perform at the same level, they come back to the franchisor and they want their money back. They're upset. That's franchising. And you're constantly dealing with some of these disgruntled franchisees, and it doesn't matter. And it doesn't matter if it's any of my brands or some of the best brands out there. Subway, doesn't matter. There's always 10% of the stores that are transitioning. There's always 10% of the franchisees that do, honestly, 90% of the bitching. And that's part of the challenging. So franchising isn't for everyone, but you know what? I'm in it and I know exactly what I get with it. Some days are very frustrating, but at the end of the day, there's nothing more rewarding that when you see franchisees get into a business and run a thriving business. They're upgrading their life and their lifestyle, and they're thankful that they got into the business. Those are very rewarding moments, and I've been blessed to have witnessed that thousands of times over the years.
Yeah, you've mentioned passion. Are there some other character traits which usually come across in good franchisees?
Passion will only take you so far. If you're in the people space, you've got to be a good communicator. Okay, you've got to be able to communicate. You got to be a good listener. You have to show empathy. Look, when franchisees contact me and they're disgruntled, I try to be empathetic to them as long as they're being respectful. Okay, some of them come at, hey, this is your fault. You told me I was going to make 600,000 a year, or whatever the number is. I say, absolutely, I did not. I did not tell you that. So sometimes I got to put them back on their heels and say, no, I didn't tell you that. We have stores out that are doing those kind of numbers, and you told yourself that you're going to be one of those. You're going to be in that top 20%. The reality is you're in the bottom 30%. You're not in the top 20%, and that's the difference. Now, here's what they do. And I can tell you in franchising, the top 20%, and I don't care what brand it is, there's a common thread amongst all those top 20 percenters of what they're doing, how they're leaning into the business, their day-to-day attention to detail. And now, of course, you've got those one-offs where people just got straight up lucky. They're in a great location. They put in half the effort and make more money than anyone. Look, I get it. But in most cases, the people who are winning in whatever franchise it is, it's because they're doing all the right things. And it's not any one thing that you do, it's the 10 things that you do consistently, and it never stops. And that's where a lot of people miss it. They work hard for a season and then they sit back. Or when the business starts to thrive, what do? They want to step away from the business because they think that's part of the transition as an entrepreneur. I'm gonna open this business. I'm gonna grow the business, and then I'm gonna step away from the business and golf and fish more and do the things I love to do. Here's what happens: if they were the heartbeat of the business, if they were the people that the customers came to see, now you didn't have a good succession plan, and you gotta address those things as well. It happens all the time.
One of the things I found really interesting about Snap Fitness, what you did was from the very start, even without knowing how big of a success it was going to be, You made sure that the foundations were in place to support enormous growth. One of the things you did was hire the best lawyers, franchise lawyers in the country, to make sure that all of that was set up correctly. I think a lot of
Yeah.
entrepreneurs will struggle to make big investments, even into the important things which they need for growth at an early stage. What made you decide to do that, and what advice would you give to other business owners who want to scale in the future?
Well, before I got into franchising, before I wanted to franchise the business, I opened one store. And this former employee of mine and we opened this store together, and it was performing this health club. It wasn't even called Snap Fitness at the time. It was called America's Fitness Center. And we built one, and it was just taking off. The memberships were great. It was making money, and it was really easy to do. Keep in mind, the 20 years prior, I was building these full service clubs with indoor pools, racquetball courts, all this overhead. The Snap Fitness was a much smaller footprint, much less employees, much simpler product, but still delivered great value. So look, I built one. It did phenomenal. I wasn't thinking about franchising. I went ahead and built another one in a different size market, performed the exact same way. And then I built one in a little town of about 3,500 people. And that store performed the same way. It was at that time that I knew. So think about it. Before I got into franchising, I had built three clubs, and every one of them, they were in an urban market, a mid-sized market, and a small market. And all three of them were performing at high levels. And I knew that I had a tiger by the tail. So I said, if I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do it right. Which, thank God, that's a quality of mine. I don't like to cut corners. I like to make sure that I'm thorough and I've thought about what I'm doing here. So I didn't build it. I didn't franchise it to do 20 stores. I thought, look, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to have the foundation to be able to support hundreds of stores. I didn't know I was going to build thousands, but look, if you can, if you can do 100, you can do 300. If you can do 300, you can do 750, and if you can do 750, you can do 2,000. It's reality.
So now you've taken on quite a different challenge with Nautical Bowls. That's not a similar vertical at all as fitness. It ties into it slightly because it's about nutrition, which obviously in the fitness world is very
Yeah.
important. How did you decide on what challenge to take on next, or maybe even what vertical to take on next?
You know what? For me, fortunately, being in business over 40 years, I realize that, look, of course, bowls is different than a health club, but you're still dealing with people. It's still systems and processes, and execution. And look, when we started that concept, Nautical Bowls, it went off absolute gangbusters. In 3 years, we've awarded 192 territories. So it's taken off, but we've had a bit of a headwind. We've got a bit of a headwind with the economy here. So we had some things that are affecting our sales today. You've got franchisees that have high interest rates, and the consumer is. You've got high interest rates. You've got inflation. You've got a consumer that's holding onto their dollars a little tighter, and so they're holding onto their discretional dollars. And the sales numbers are soft from where they were even 2 years ago.
Do you consider diversifying more internationally?
I'm always looking at opportunity, and wherever opportunity brings me is what I look. You know what? There's still, here's the one thing, all I know is the United States. I know the United States, and I know this. We've been through things like this before. This country has overcome some enormous challenges. So I know that we will persevere, and we just got to do something to fix it.
Last thing I just wanted to touch on real quick was social media. We talked about it briefly just before we started here. You now have a following of 670,000 Instagram followers. And also, I saw that Nautical Bowls has got quite some social media attention and focus as well when it comes to the marketing strategy. How has that changed the not just the franchising model, but also just the way that you set up the company compared to 5 or 10 years ago?
I don't use social media at all for selling franchises. For me personally, my brand, the Peter Taunton brand, I don't. When the marketing team post something on Nautical Bowls, I'll repost it because I have an affiliation with the brand. But I'm not on social media saying, come to Nautical Bowls, buy a franchise. That's not what I use it for. My social media for me is predominantly, it's just sound bites of my thoughts. Okay. If you look at it, I put very little personal stuff on there, like when I'm traveling and vacationing. And it drives my fiance crazy because she would like me to be posting things all the time of us, but that's not what my social media for. My private life is my private life. I just don't do it. I'll post some things about my kids. I'll do something with her on our anniversary, things like that. But it's literally a handful of posts a year. I'm not that, I think the things that I'm saying are not that profound. And it's not that I'm a dinosaur. Hey, look, I grew up with my mom. My mom, she cooked, she cleaned the house, she took care of the kids. That was very traditional. Today, it's very common where both people are working. So I'm all for that. But you know what? The both people working and both people caring for the kids and nurturing for the kids, that's all wonderful. But I think at the end of the day, the man's job is to provide and protect his family. And that's how I think God intended it to be. That's why we're physically, in most cases, physically stronger and built the way that we are. And women tend to be more nurturing. There's probably a hell of a lot of people out there right now that are cringing at that. But I'm just telling you, that's how I grew up. It doesn't make it right or wrong or better than anyone else. But for me, that's my position on how I roll with social media and how I present myself. And people know, those people who are close to me, they know, hey, look, I'm a bit of a cowboy. You know what? I'm not going to take a lot of bullshit. I don't stand for bullying on somebody picking on anyone near me that's near and dear to me, or if I happen to witness where somebody is in a situation where they're very uncomfortable by being bullied. I also try to be very compassionate to the underdog. I make a point multiple times a week to feed the homeless, give people a leg up. I'm very compassionate. And I think that comes from the way that I was raised, and also the fact that I've been so blessed in so many ways in my life that I feel a debt to God of how He wants me to show up every day and to help others and support and mentor others. That's why I do things like this. That's why I do consulting with young entrepreneurs who are a little bit lost and want to try to find their way. When I'm working with young entrepreneurs, I don't charge them anything. Now, when I work in corporate America, that's a different story. But I like helping people win. That's what lights my fire.
I think that's a beautiful message to end with. Thank you so much for coming on today, Peter. I've enjoyed it a lot. I learned a lot, and yeah, I hope we can reconnect again soon.
No, you got it.